I'm sure you know how important a security audit is for your smart contract and your D app as a whole. And I'm also sure that many in your team, and maybe even you as CTO, don't entirely know how an audit works and how to better select a firm that is up to the task of making sure your contract is secure. We usually end up going by name or by referral, but it's very useful to actually understand what's going on behind the scenes and how to understand if a firm is suitable and if they are giving their best work to you. And this is why we're recording this video, to explain to you how a security audit works, which steps are involved in the process, and I'll give you some tips on questions to ask and how to see if your auditors are actually doing their work in a proper way or if they are not performing as they should. So here at HackAChain, what we do is a 4-step audit. Essentially, we start with a discovery and code review, then we go to the phase that is the threat and risk modeling, then penetration test, and finally we do the final reporting to the client. What are those phases? So phase 1, discovery, is the first time when the auditors get to see the code and look at the documentation. Essentially, your team is going to present all the documentation and all the code to the auditing team. They're going to review everything to understand what your D app does. For this to be successful, your documentation must specify all the specs of the contract, what it has to do, and the auditors must be able to understand how you implemented every single functionality into the contract. If this is not clear because your documentation is not as complete as it should be, or because the logic is very complex and should require more information for a person that is not in the day-to-day of the project, then the auditors should and must ask you questions and schedule meetings and have chats with you. So this is the first sign that you can use to see if your auditors are good. If your code is very complex and if you see that they aren't really grasping how it all works and they aren't asking questions, they aren't taking meetings with you, and they aren't really talking to your entire engineering team, this is a sign that they are not really doing their best for your audit. So it's very important to see how they are going after the information and whether they are getting it or not. And so first thing is getting acquainted with the code and the documentation. And then what you do is you proceed to a code review. So essentially we check how you implemented everything and make sure you follow the best practice in coding the language, best practice in variable naming, in documentation writing, and also in testing. This can, usually some other recommendations come from this. So if testing is not robust for a certain function or a certain part of the code, we will highlight this because it is important. Even if this is not a vulnerability by itself, it is important to fix tests and have good tests, have good docs, as it will prevent further bugs when we improve on the code. So this is the first step. What you get from it is a summary that the auditors use for the next steps of the audit. So essentially they are going to summarize the code and the contract and understand what it does. Then we move on to the second phase, which is risk and threat modeling. This is largely a brainstorm. So your auditor team is very experienced with vulnerabilities and threats, and they're going to essentially, based on what they saw of our code, they're going to brainstorm all the ways that they could try to break it. And here it's important to differentiate risks and threats. So threats or attack vectors are essentially bugs that can be exploited. So they are failures in the code that the auditors see and are able to exploit to actually gain advantage or destroy the functionality of a contract. Those are very bad. Risks, on the other hand, are known. Contracts have risks that are known. For instance, you chose to trust an Oracle. You choose to integrate with a different application. You have owner or privileged keys in your contract. Those are risks. You know that if those keys leak, if the Oracle is compromised, your contract is going to suffer. But it is still the duty of the auditor's team to highlight the risks, understand how they could impact the contract, and how you could mitigate them further, and check the way you're currently mitigating risks to see if they are appropriate or not. So essentially, first, we map the risks, understand what can be lost in case a key is compromised, in case an Oracle is broken, and how you guys are currently mitigating the risks. So are you using multi-sig? Are you using a Oracle trusted by the market? What are you doing? So we get a table of all the risks, all the mitigations, and all the worst case scenarios. And for attack vectors, essentially, we base ourselves on repositories of known vulnerabilities of web applications and smart contracts, and we try to see all possible things that could go wrong with the contract. So based on how it works, based on more or less on the kind of application that it is, we brainstorm all the things that we imagine could happen and all the conditions in which it could happen. Because most bugs aren't really possible in any scenario, they're usually possible during stress time, so during network congestion, considering nav extraction, sometimes considering failures of other applications and complex cross-contract interactions. So it's important to also model different scenarios. This is a place where you can also test your auditors. So when you first interview or talk to someone that's offering you an audit service, it's interesting to ask them what they think the main threats and risks of the contract are and what they're expecting to see. If they are experienced and if they understand your business, they are going to be able to give you a very comprehensive answer and a lot of information about different things that they plan to study during the testing. If they are not, or if they didn't pay enough attention to you as a client, they aren't going to know what to say, and they're probably just going to be saying some very random and normal stuff that usually is applicable to everything. So we're going to get a feeling of which people are actually like bringing different ideas to the table and who is just trying to get your business as they are trying any other business. And always aim for the people that give you the most attention, because this, in the end, is a business of auditors paying attention to your code and dedicating to finding things. This risk and threat modeling is going to output two tables essentially, a table of risks with their mitigation and with their worst case scenarios, and a table of hypotheses for attack vectors with all the hypotheses and all the scenarios in which they could happen. And with this, we move to the next phase. So phase 3. Phase 3 is called Pentesting. Essentially, we're going to be going over each item of the attack vectors table and each scenario and creating a test for each of those. So we're building tests and trying to make the contract break. So this is where most of the work is. Our auditors are going to be spending a lot of time developing those tests and putting them in practice in testnet and also in local networks to see if they can break the code. Whatever they find, they're going to write down as recommendations for your audit and that are going to be included on the final report. On the risk side of things, we're going to be looking at which risks you have and whether or not they're necessary. So first we're going to see, is there a way to do what they're trying to do without taking any risks? And if there is, we're going to recommend that because it's always best to eliminate risks. And if there is not, we're going to see, okay, how we're mitigating the risk. Is that an industry standard? Is that a best practice? Or is that sloppy? If we think there's a better way to mitigate risks, we're also going to input this in there because it's not enough to only patch the bugs. It's also necessary to be robust about security when talking about blockchain. Here's another point of differentiation. A lot of auditors don't really treat risks with that kind of seriousness. So most people are just going to focus on bugs. If your auditor doesn't talk about risks at all and how to mitigate them, this is a red flag too. It's very essential to mitigate both risks and threats, and if your auditors think that their work's only bugs, they're probably doing less than optimal work for you. So this is another important point. And finally, after all the pen testing is done, we're going to be drafting a final report for you guys. So we're going to have a meeting with our engineering team, present the report. They're going to have a time to review it and implement changes and ask us questions and have further meetings if necessary. And after those are done, we're going to take another look at the code and check that all the implementation is correct. In case it is, we're going to draft a final version of the report that can be made public with our signature showing all that we found and that your team fixed it all. And we're also going to be posting that on our social media and other networks for everyone to see. And this is essentially the process, those 4 steps. And I hope right now that you know how it works, you can ask better questions and you can be more secure when choosing your auditor for your Web3 project. So if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact us and we are glad to help.